Hello there, my dear friends. So far, so good. Yet another week, and I want to welcome you to Steady Insights as we delve deeper into more fascinating facts. I believe you are very fine, and I want to especially welcome you to the allusions, images, symbols, how to study prophecy class. In this particular episode, remember we are within episode number 4. We are enjoying the topic, the nations part 1. I do remember in previous occasions where I've had the opportunity to discuss the Noahic flood. When I say the Noahic flood, I mean the flood that is recorded in the account of Genesis with regards to a worldwide catastrophic flood. And it appears that many people have their own views, their own understanding as to whether to believe or not the flood that is recorded in the book of Genesis. It is very clear from historical fossil records as well as scientific evidence that there are two classes of people when it comes to this flood event. However, fossils are one of the best evidences of a global flood, especially where many fossils are found. And there is a particular fact for you. For example, we don't find marine creatures such as fish, clams, and corals buried and fossilized on the seafloor. No, even though they once lived there, but instead we find most of them buried in sedimentary rocks on the continents. Could you believe that? They are even found on high mountains. And for that to happen, the ocean waters had to totally flood the continents. That is what actually is given in the accounts of the Bible. And as we go deeper, we will understand even before then how the nations came to exist. Once again, welcome and follow me closely as we enjoy this discourse. As we deal with prophecy, like we have been doing for the first 3 episodes, it is important that we highlight some very pertinent statements in the Bible. And one of them, as we will be highlighting in this episode, is Daniel 7 verse 14. It reads, "Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed." This striking prophetic vision of Daniel affirms the sovereignty of Christ over all nations. And as we go on, we see that it reveals God's grand intention that every nation, tribe, and tongue will ultimately serve the King of Kings. But one fascinating twist in this narrative is that the journey of the nations through history has been filled with rebellion, with idolatry, and deviation from God's plan, at least as far as the biblical narrative is concerned. Like I started earlier, from the descendants of Noah, nations spread across the earth, many turning their backs on the Creator. Yet amidst all this rebellion, God chose to raise one nation through which he would bless the world. Biblically, that is Israel. And from there, through Christ, he raised a church, a spiritual nation not bound by borders or ethnicity. If you were listening carefully in my introductory remarks, it appears that one of the most fascinating events that have ever hit this world is the flood in the times of Noah. And we see that from the sons of Noah arose after that deluge the nations that populated the world, and most of them were hostile, as we will discover, to God, worshipping other gods, and living according to their own laws. In this episode, we will take our time through a divine and historical trajectory of how these nations were formed. And our discourse will follow this trajectory. We will look at the origin of nations, where we will touch on the first nations. We will discover the nation begotten by God. Then secondly, we will look at the chosen people, the history of Israel, the history of the church, then the role of the chosen people. Let's begin by looking at the origin of nations, the first nations. We see that after Adam and Eve's fall, humanity retained some awareness of God's supremacy. So it is no surprise that the people and their descendants continued to come to the entrance to Eden, guarded by the cherubims, to offer sacrifices to God. Before I continue, let me just give you a highlight of what I just said. It is clear, according to the Genesis account, that after Adam and Eve sinned, they were thrown out of Eden. But here we know that in that period, after they were thrown out of Eden, mankind still recognized divine authority. Unfortunately, as generations passed, wickedness abounded. When God destroyed the earth with a flood, He also removed Eden from their midst, symbolizing a greater spiritual disconnect. As the earth repopulated after the flood, people like Nimrod arose in defiance of God. And we see in the old Hebrew version, according to Genesis 10 verse 9, we know him to be a giant hunter against the Lord. He built cities like Babel and Nineveh, and they became centers of human arrogance and false worship. We see that men like Nimrod decided to create their own states outside of God, ruled by themselves, and these became the foundation of worldly empires, directly opposing the plan of God. As we move along the timeline of history, we see a nation begotten by God. In the midst of this global rebellion, God initiated His own nation. And here we see Genesis 10 uses the word goyim. You might want to note that, and that is a fact. The word goyim, Goyim, in the translated version in English, to describe nations, a term which later applied to Gentiles and those estranged from God. To rescue them, God chose a man called Abram and declared, and I read Genesis 12 verse 2 to 3, I will make you a great nation, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The question is this: why choose Abraham? And we have an answer. In Genesis 18:19, a fact for you to note down. God chose Abraham because of this. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Basically, he was chosen to be the vacuum through which children who come out would keep the way of the Lord. By raising a nation built on obedience, justice, and divine law, God intended to show the world that everything that happens should be in tune with what is led by Him. His laws were just standards that would astonish the nations. And we are supposed to be the model of society, drawing other nations to the light. Now let's look at the chosen people, specifically through the lenses of the history of Israel. It is clear throughout history, as far as the biblical record recounts, that sadly Israel failed to live up to the divine expectation. And this is well posited in 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 5. It reads, instead of wanting to be an exemplary nation led directly by God, Israel wanted to be like the other nations. So sadly, by demanding a king, they rejected God as their sovereign, though God permitted it and provided regulations for kinship, the results were tragic. And as we can see, there were most of the kings doing evil. Even the best of them were flawed. As sinners ruling sinners, they fell short of God's holy standard. And we see clearly, according to Daniel 2:44, there is no righteous government except the one to come, that is, the kingdom of God. More importantly, as we draw within the New Testament, we see the history of the church. With Israel's decline, Jesus established a new people, this time not defined by ethnicity or geography, but by faith. How do we confirm that? In Matthew 20, verse 25 through 28, leaders were to serve humbly. For the first 300 years, the church endured persecution and largely stayed faithful. But here comes the twist. When you go through the annals of history, it is clear that Constantine's conversion and the legalization of Christianity in the 4th century shifted the whole agenda of purity in Christianity. He became its unofficial ruler to intertwine with state power. By the 5th and the 6th centuries, the Bishop of Rome gained civil authority, and service was replaced by domination. So it's no surprise that we see throughout the Middle Ages, anyone who did not obey the authority of the church had to pay for their rebellion with death, torture, or imprisonment. Tragically, the church repeated Israel's mistakes, exchanging service for supremacy. Then comes the very important twist in the story: the role of the chosen people. You know, as you have observed throughout this episode, Israel was meant to be a light to the nations, and the church is called the light of the world. The question is, how? Number 1, through obedience. In Deuteronomy 4 verse 6, Matthew 5:16, we see a faithful lifestyle validates our message. Very important. Number 2, by showing the solution to sin. Clearly, Jesus is the lamb slain for the world, even as we read from Leviticus 4 verse 27 through 29 into the New Testament's record, John 3 verse 16. Number 3, as we continue to discover the role of the chosen people, it is by announcing the return of Christ. The second coming is central to our mission. When you combine these 3 very important facets, they come together to show the world how we as a people have been connected and chosen to realize the mission. Yet, historically, both Israel and the church have failed to accomplish the work of God. Still, grace abounds. Despite failure, the world has been blessed through Israel and through the church with the blessed message of salvation. Now we stand at the brink of eternity. We are living in the final stretch of history. The call to proclaim God's salvation with urgency is louder than ever. It is our final opportunity to live out our divine calling as a people, chosen not to dominate, no, but to reflect the glory and the redeeming love to all nations. I hope you are ready to do this.